Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the session. My name's Greg Lavery. I'll be doing the presentation. Let me just pop the presentation up. Hopefully everyone can see that. Today we're on module 7. So having done 6 other modules, today we'll be talking about the 3 things you need to do differently for a net zero carbon fit out. This is the, as I said, 7th in the series. We've got dates now for 8, 9 and 10, so hold for those at the end of the presentation, and you can catch up on the 6 that are done because we've captured the video presentations on the website. So where to start off? Now, in previous discussions, we've mentioned the pie chart and where the greenhouse gas emissions are over the lifetime of a commercial building. What we noted last time was that 70% of the emissions are embodied. So here's a starting off point for us to say, well, okay, how do we do this differently? Well, we have to recognise where the emissions are if we're going to take them out. And this leads to 3 in sequence, very interesting next steps or conclusions from how we then attack those. Point number 1, you need to think circular. The circular economy is the only way to reduce significantly embodied emissions. And within that, there is a sort of hierarchy of circular economy. There's reduce, reuse, refurbish, remanufacture and recycle. So reduce, not really an easy option because we need offices and we need spaces. Reuse, there can be quality issues with that. Refurbish, to the extent that the client's happy with that. Remanufacture is the area that we think is the most exciting because that is no compromise on quality, massive reductions in greenhouse gas emissions and cost savings. We're a little bit less excited about recycling. Well, in theory, a lot of things these days can be recycled. However, taking things back to a molecular level and then rebuilding products from those requires a lot of carbon emissions and a lot of water waste on all those other things. The issue with that then is that the cost can be almost as high and sometimes higher than if you're making things from high carbon virgin materials. Therefore, is recycling something that's really going to help us to significantly reduce carbon emissions? We are not a massive fan of recycling, and certainly in an office environment where you say, okay, client, your office or your furniture or your fittings or your walling or your flooring is recyclable. Are they really going to go to the trouble of making that happen when their business might be, in this case, the Economist Group, publishing magazines? Do they have someone who's really focused on taking up all the flooring and making sure that it finds its way to a recycler? Well, that's something that we don't think is a realistic way forward to reduce carbon emissions. We much prefer reuse, refurbish and remanufacture. Okay, that's point number 1, think circular. Point number 2 is that you need to start early, especially when you're thinking in a circular way. So this here at the top of the screen is the RIBA plan of work. RIBA is the Royal Institute of British Architects. They have come up with this plan of work that's used. It was originally designed for building construction design and construction and the whole process, but it's also used in fit outs and the interior design community has adopted it as its own for a process for putting essentially stage gates in and ordering all of the thinking around design. It's also a quality process because it means that nothing gets left out and clients have the right to review things at various points. So let's recognize that this is a widely adopted process, and let's then interrogate it because it has been designed with the linear economy in mind because of a number of things. So first of all, at the strategic definition stage, you need to start early because if you've got a net zero carbon goal, that needs to be articulated and include that strategy, including a carbon budget alongside the traditional financial budget, right at that strategic definition stage. Stage number 1 then, the preparation and briefing. If you are going to adopt the circular economy, you absolutely must understand what the possibilities of the assets, and by assets I mean existing furniture you might have in your offices, fittings, materials, but then the space that you might be moving into, what is there in terms of walls, kitchens, layouts, all those sorts of things need to be assessed, especially things like ceilings, mechanical, HVAC systems, flooring, all those sorts of things need to be assessed, not just by anyone, but by experts who can inform the concept design about circular opportunities for those assets. also what are the budget savings and the time savings available from those, because if you don't rip a kitchen out, that means that you can get that space refurbished a lot quicker than if you were to rip it all out, take it all out, and then bring all the new ones in. As I mentioned there, that should inform the concept design stage. Now, let's think about the alternative. In a linear economy where everything can be purchased new and you know roughly what that costs, in brackets, it's quite expensive. That's a simple process because you assume that everything is available, so you don't have to assess what's available at the moment. Those existing assets, assuming they're all going to be thrown away, which is a much more expensive way of doing things if you're then going to assume everything's thrown away and have to buy new. So we see that as the first two parts of this starting early, is get that information and have those conversations. Traditionally then, the materials, furnishing and equipment, let's call them assets, are usually only considered for the first time at stage 4. So for instance, when we're having conversations with potential client projects, we often hear, oh no, we're only at stage 3. We don't want to talk to you about anything related to furniture because that doesn't come into consideration until stage 4. Now you can see why that is a plain fail, because if you're going to think in a circular economy way, you need to understand. The other fail is that at the 5th stage during manufacturing construction, it's only then that existing assets are considered for disposal. So typically what that will look like is, okay, you, the contractor, have given us a lump sum quote to do all of the works. As part of that, of course, you will rip out what's there right now and dispose of that in the quickest and cheapest possible way, which doesn't, what sometimes can lead to landfilling, sometimes recycling, but it's not guaranteeing the future of those assets, and certainly doesn't reduce emissions, because there's a lot of destruction there that leads to ongoing emissions through the decomposition of those materials. But also beyond that, obviously, you need to replace what you're ripping out with new items made from virgin materials, which are much higher carbon by definition than circular. So there's a couple of fails there in the traditional system. The answer is to start early. Now, how do you do that? The third tip then for how to create a low carbon fit out is to collaborate. So big quote there in green, no one can save the planet on their own. We come across some wonderful designers who feel it's their duty to have every little bit of know-how around every single material and its sustainability, and we help them to provide that information. But hopefully by that stage they're collaborating with us, and we can open our books and expertise to all of our designers, all of our sustainability experts, and provide them with good information that helps them to save the planet through a good design. And let's recognise that no one person, especially a client or a project manager or designer, can understand what can and can't be reused or remanufactured, because we're talking a really detailed level there. What cost savings are available, what time savings are available, and what carbon emissions of every element, whether it's new, reused or remanufactured, is in order to design the footprint. And per our last session, module number 6 delivered by Susan, we know that in spring, which we're now at the start of, the new net zero carbon building standard is about to be released at beta stage. That will give a lot of guidance as to what needs to be done to gather the information, but it won't be providing very much information. So that's just more work to do if you're trying to do this on your own, but you don't have to. There's lots of organisations, especially suppliers, who will work very collaboratively at no cost early on to help shape a project. The other part of collaboration, let's not forget, is working with landlords and past tenants, because if at the very early stages, brokering a conversation to say, hey, you, the landlord, you want to minimise the amount of waste going down in your lifts and the amount of traffic movements and the time it takes to get the new customer or the new tenant paying rent. You also want to keep your old tenant happy because they might be moving to another one of your properties. Let's get together and say, okay, what of the existing layout and assets can be reused or redeployed or rehomed in order to minimise the amount of dilapidations, which obviously saves everyone time and money. So that sort of early collaboration with expert know-how to make that process work is a great thing to do. And we have on the call Paul Gaughan, who's the commercial director at Nezo Interiors. He's really across all of this. Would love to hear his thoughts in the Q&A about how this can be done efficiently and effectively, because he's really big on the sort of early engagement piece in order to have these conversations. So Paul, we'll hear from you in a minute. To continue then, really just to summarise, the three things that are very, very different from a traditional design and build or fit out are that firstly, you need to think circular. Secondly, you need to start early. And finally, you need to collaborate. And all of those are interrelated, as we discussed. So that's the sort of introduction to this discussion that we're about to go into. It will be available on recording, as Susan mentioned. We have 3 further webinars planned. The next one, Module 8, is on why staff and visitors love net zero carbon offices. This is really designed to help those who are thinking about the, let's say, non-financial and non-time benefits of net zero carbon, to think about how all those other, let's call them softer or less easily quantified benefits of a net zero carbon office. Module number 9 is how to convince others to act on climate change, because we know that there are many wonderful architects who really, and designers and clients and agents and other property professionals out there who are really passionate about climate change, but are surrounded by others who are a little more skeptical, are more difficult to convince, and would rather do things the old-fashioned way. So we've got a module there on some really good tips on how to make that change happen. And then finally, module 10 is stepping beyond the environmental benefits of net zero carbon to social value and how that can be created through an office fit out process. And we're aiming to wrap that up by the end of May. We've got a bit of break now until 24th of April. So we welcome you to register at those. And of course, you can catch up on previous sessions that we've done and this recording of this session at the Academy part of the ripeoffice.com website.